Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks, Kara. And thank you, everyone, for joining me on this journey into the first kind of project of an open source developer. So I think everyone gets into open source, or different people get into open source for different reasons. And along the way, especially when you're starting out, I found I made a lot of mistakes. And I think sometimes we try and hide our mistakes, but there's a lot of value in looking back at where you went wrong to improve for the future. And also just to share with people who aren't sure if they want to get into it, and just like assuring you don't have to be perfect. This isn't for people who have done it before. You can start out, make the mistakes, and still make a lot of progress. So just a bit of an introduction to myself. My name is Ifiok. It's a Nigerian name, and but you can call me Ifi. So I'm known as Ifi by my close friends. So I'm the creator and maintainer of Remirror. So Remirror is a project that kind of, I guess, is a reason why I'm speaking on this in this conference. So yeah, it's kind of opened a lot of doors. I'm also a software developer. I'm a drummer, so I play drums a lot in my past, and I play drums quite often now. I used to be a sprinter. I haven't done this for a while, but I used to do sprinting in. I lived in Australia for a year, and I did some sprinting when I was there. I kept on getting injured though, so I didn't actually compete in the competitions, but I did a lot of training and ran some good times. And recently, I've become like a founder of a company called Kickjump, which addresses some of the issues, at least for me, that some of the issues I found with open source. I feel like for me, my motivation is best served when I'm doing it in the way I'm hoping to do it through Kickjump. So let's get away. Let's begin. So just before I jump into like the mistakes I made, I kind of want to give the motivations I had, because this will lay out why these mistakes were made and hopefully allow you to know what works for you when you're getting into open source. So for me, my motivation for starting Remirror was literally what you can see, the GIF or the GIF of Twitter.
Iffy.
Can you hear me? Yes. Can you not hear me?
It sounds like you do have slides, but I can't see the slides.
Oh,
but until you said GIF, I wasn't sure, and then suddenly you said GIF, and I was like, I don't want to miss out on a GIF.
No, you know what? It's me being really really basic. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, phew. I'm looking forward to the GIF.
I haven't given permission, so yeah. Anyway, the screen is shared. You can see it now. Okay, let me go back to this slide. This was the slide I had. This is my first slide. But yeah, so the motivation for the start of Remirror was basically I was playing around with Twitter, and I really liked how you can add a mention and delete a mention, and it's fully editable. I'd worked with some text editors before. I'd used Slate.js in the past, and I've used Draft.js in the past, but it wasn't easy to get this kind of behavior where not only could you add a mention to a person, but you could back delete, and it wouldn't delete the whole mention. It would delete just part of the text. And this was literally the only reason I wanted to, that I ended up starting Remirror. At first, I was just going to build like some functionality, but as I was building it, I stumbled across ProseMirror. I saw some examples from a really great project called TipTap, which didn't quite have this functionality, but had a lot of like the frame for Vue.js, had a lot of the stuff I wanted to use. So I kind of mixed and matched different techniques I learned from different projects in order to really like focus on this. I want to be able to do mentions like Twitter does in Remirror, and I achieved that goal. And so that was literally why I started Remirror. It was never meant to be a big project. I never thought I would still be working on it after, I think, more than 18 months at least. So it was just to scratch this itch. Can I do this? And yeah, I was able to do it with Remirror. So that's why I launched it. And so fast forward to today, Remirror has 1,000 stars on GitHub. I mean, that's not like a great. It doesn't mean it's that well used. It has, I think, over 30 contributors. There's a lot of activity around it, and recently we've had a few companies have hired people specifically to as Remirror developers for their projects, which is really exciting. So it's still a very small project. It's still in its infancy, but it's definitely got traction, and I'm glad this prompted me to start it. So the first mistake. Let's jump into it. Mistake number one. So I'm going to give you 5 mistakes I think I made starting Remirror. The first mistake was starting the project. Now this sounds like it's kind of like tongue in cheek, and it sounds a bit like an antithesis of what I'm trying to encourage people to start open source. But what I want to emphasize is that open source is it tends to take more than you expect in terms of, so when I started Remare, I was like, okay, I'm going to build this small thing. And what it ended up being was a lot more. So a lot more time investment, a lot more, I had to learn a lot more than I thought I was going to need to learn. So in a sense, I was grabbing open source, not realizing that a lot of things would also have to be dropped in order to accommodate the whole open source work. Now, because I was working on something that intrinsically motivated me, it was like scratching my own itch in a sense, dog fooding, as some people call it. That motivation pushed me through, and open source was definitely a good choice. But I would still say that you're going to work harder than you think starting an open source project, and you're probably going to take more time than you would have anticipated. Just like with any project, you're going to start a business, you're going to start a job. Things tend to expand into the space that they have to fill. And open source isn't any different. So that's mistake number one, getting started. Mistake number two. So this is the real mistake. Remare was specifically built for me to prove I could do something. So it was built in order to implement Twitter-like functionality and just in general social-like functionality on a text editor that can also be used for formatting and for all of these things. But fundamentally, it isn't something I've used in any of my work, and even in my personal projects. Remare was, in a sense, just a standalone. And what happened was, after I did my first push, people just started starring it. I wasn't promoting it, but I think people were searching for React text editor, and Remare kept on coming up. So GitHub's SEO is really good. So Remare was getting stars about me promoting it, and it got to about 200 stars without me really doing anything fundamental. And so that was what pushed me to keep on working on it. Had it not gained any traction, I would have stopped where I first set the boundary. But the problem is, it wasn't something I was using, and as a result, when people were asking me questions about, oh, how would I implement an API to back this up? How can I add this functionality? How can I add all of this functionality? This was my response. I had no idea. And so this is something that actually still a bit of an ongoing issue. And one of the things I'm addressing with the work I'm doing now is making sure that I'm actually a user of Remare, and I'm able to have some input into how it should be used in projects. It seems really basic, but again, I think when I first started the project, I wasn't focusing on the motivation I had for working on it. And so as a result, I wasn't using it in the projects. And so that is something I'm addressing right now. So mistake number three. So mistake number three is not focusing on my strengths. So one of the things about working on an open source project is that you're straight away, you're thrust into a situation where you're constantly learning. You think you need to know A, B, C. You actually need to know all the way through to Z. And this was build tools, how to publish a package. There were things. Now I'm going to step back and remind myself how I felt when I first started the project. I often would look at GitHub projects and be in awe of the processes they use for Git commits, for all of these, for structuring the project, how they handle pull requests. And it's like, how do people learn this? And what I've learned through Remare is that people learn this by doing it. But one of the things I suffered with in Remare, and I still need to work on, is just not focusing on my strengths. So one of the things I'm very good at is, or I find fun, is like thinking of APIs and building them out, and just like maybe abstract code. But Remare also has a very visual element. And I think if you look at my work, most of my work has probably been more on the abstract side and less on the visual side. So the Remare doesn't have as many examples as it should do. And one of the things I'm really excited about the future of Remare is that we're now able to focus more on getting more contributors on board. We're able to now build out some examples and actually build in the UI side of things that people have been asking for in the project. But the way to look at this is, when you're working on a project and there's you especially at the beginning, you kind of want it to be the best at what it does, because open source is amazing in the fact that people can contribute back. So if someone sees that your project is amazing in these three areas, and we're really rubbish in the fourth area, they're more likely to contribute to the rubbish area and bring that up to scratch. Whereas if you're trying to be good at everything, it tends to be our weaknesses are a lot worse than our strengths. So if you're trying to be like, you're trying to build the UI, build every single part of it, you may actually end up losing out on that excitement people feel when they see something excellent. So for me, I feel like I could have got a lot more done and a lot quicker had I focused on those strengths and made sure Remira was in a sense came to my strengths so that people come in and fill out my weaknesses. So 4. So too much experimentation. Now this is actually, I think, one of the things that contributors and users say is that they're not sure what works in Remira. And again, this goes back to what Remira was first built for. It was an experiment. It was, can I build a Twitter-like functionality or a social editor experience that has all the trimmings of a full editor experience? But I never switched that off. So there are ideas I've had for Remira. Oh, this would be a nice one. And what I tended to do is just put them into the main core. But the problem is that people start relying on it. And if you're going to have a breaking change, it makes it a lot harder to change that thing that was maybe just experimental and take it away. And I think this also goes back to the point number 2. So my second point, which is not something I was using. So I wasn't feeling the pain of switching that API. So I think number 2 and number 4 are very much linked. So too much experimentation just leads to a lot of issues, and it means your project can't really. It just can't be used by users with as much confidence because they're not sure what works well, they're not sure what's strong, and I'm not even sure what works well and what's strong, which isn't great. And then the last one, and I think this actually ties into everything. And I had a lot of excuses in my head, but avoiding documentation. Now, the documentation for Remira isn't terrible. So if I say, if I go to Remira, so it looks good, but it's very sparse. Once you start actually trying to build something meaningful, it's not at the level that it needs to be in order for people to feel confident. So, and there were a lot of reasons I had for avoiding documentation, just excuses. So I was waiting for the API to stabilize before writing the documentation, and also relying on code comments for auto-generated API documentation. But these aren't good excuses, and I think one of the things that I'm focusing on now for the next maybe few months is just getting the documentation up to scratch. Even if the APIs change, it's still worth it, so people feel comfortable using the project. And also, I think documentation, as I've been writing more recently, it tells you what's wrong before you release it to the public. So it has that second benefit. And so it's been a very short talk. It sounds like everything is bad, but I want to kind of go into what I've enjoyed about Remira. So Remira has opened up a lot of doors, and working on open source will open up doors for you. I've been able to get jobs just on the back of it. People will offer you opportunities, and you'll get to meet a lot of really cool people. I've met, have contributors in China, I have contributors all over the world, and you just get to experience a lot of different cultures just right in your room, especially this last year without being able to travel. So open source on the whole is amazing, but I think it's really important when you're getting into it just to know what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and not to take on too much. And also remember why you started the project, because once you lose sight of that, you may end up taking on too much or diverting a path. So in summary, open source is awesome, and good luck in your endeavors. And I encourage anyone to just, if you're doing something, just put it out there. You don't know who's going to be interested, and you may end up having a project that has a lot of stars or has a lot of impact on the community within a very, very short time. So thank you. Yeah.